Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is an HP 255 that cost me a grand total of £5, that's $7. It belonged to an older gentleman, or so I'm assuming, as it had a sticker with his AOL and Facebook password still on the bezel. I got it from a garage sale. It was in a plastic box on someone's driveway, listed for £5, and haggling just seemed a bit too cheeky. Unfortunately, it features one of the worst processors I've ever experienced. You might be thinking, how can I possibly complain considering the price, but let's get into it. So this had Windows 7 which kept getting stuck on a boot loop, and so maybe stupidly I decided to format this thing with a Windows 10 USB and see if it could handle that. Bear in mind at this point the full specs were unknown to me. The Windows install process was a lengthy one. The laptop took a long time getting ready to frustrate me with 2 days of loading and freezes. This just a moment became many moments, but after about 30 minutes we were at the desktop. I can now reveal that we have an AMD E1 1500, a 2-core, 2-thread CPU from 2013. It's an 18-watt, 1.48 GHz chip that was terrible back in 2013, and whatever's worse than terrible now. This is paired with 4 gigs of DDR3 RAM and onboard 7310 graphics. We do have a fairly generous 750GB hard drive though, plenty of room to install plenty of games that won't run. The next step was to install the GPU drivers, and this actually went fairly smoothly. Now the drivers only go up to Windows 8 on the AMD website, but the installer seemed to work to a point until it said that the drivers were installed, but when I restarted the machine they obviously weren't. All I had to do was use Windows Update and then it found some old drivers, but this also took quite a while. I tried to do a little desktop exploration while the installer was running, but this was a bad idea. This machine slows down to a crawl when you simply look at it, never mind actually use it. I suppose it is usable for very basic tasks. Don't expect smooth video playback or frustration-free web browsing, but if I was, let's say, stuck on a desert island in the middle of the sea, and this was my only method of contact with the rest of the world, and therefore hopes of rescue, I could probably put up with it. That's as good as the compliments are going to get, I'm afraid. Let's see if a lightweight Linux distro can save it. Oh, as a side note, let's quickly check the disk drive. Sometimes we get lucky and find an old PC game or DVD left in here. No such luck today though. Anyway, Linux. A common suggestion for an older laptop like this seemed to be Linux Mint XFCE, so I downloaded this as well as Balena Etcher to create my bootable USB drive. You can use whichever program you prefer. Now all we have to do is plug the drive in, open Etcher, select the Linux Mint download and click through a couple of confirmation screens. It asked me if I was sure that I wanted to overwrite what was on this drive because it was a fairly large 250 gig USB, but of course we proceeded. Back at the terrible HP laptop now, and it's just a matter of plugging our newly created USB in here, restarting, hitting escape to bring up the boot device options and selecting the USB drive itself. Bringing up the boot menu will vary depending on the laptop or PC that you're using, and it may be easier to go into the BIOS, which is usually F2, F10 or the delete key, and then setting the USB as the primary boot device. After the Linux Mint logo pops up and we get to the live environment, we can get a sense of what it's like to use Linux on this hardware before installing it. During this process, it asks if we want to erase the disk, which I chose to do as running Windows on this is not a very enjoyable experience at all, and I don't think we'll be going back. The Linux Mint install process took about the same length of time as Windows, and while usability was far from perfect, it felt quite a bit snappier to use. I then connected to Wi-Fi and ran the Update Manager while downloading Steam and the Minecraft launcher straight from within the Firefox browser. Multitasking still doesn't feel great, but Linux is definitely a better bet for an older, low-end system like this. It's far more usable as a basic task daily driver. There's a few videos of the E1-1500 in action with games on YouTube, so if you've seen them then you may already know what to expect, but I just had to try it out myself. I installed Skyrim first of all, and the launcher seemed to think we had a Radeon 6700 XT in here. Oh boy Skyrim, do I have some bad news for you. Nowhere near. At the lowest settings, the Bethesda logo itself ran at 1 FPS, so I wasn't holding out much hope for the gameplay, but it didn't even load, so I couldn't tell you how well it ran. It just hit this loading screen indefinitely. I mean, an hour later and we were still here. Left 4 Dead 2 made it to the loading screen and better yet ran with at least 30 FPS. Of course I hopped straight into the settings and turned everything way down to its lowest. At the screen's native 1366 by 768 resolution we were getting between 10 and 20 FPS in the actual game, which is about 10 to 20 FPS more than I expected. Luckily we can drop all the way down to 480p with this game, but because we are so CPU limited, it really isn't going to help. I saw a few Reddit posts about the E1-1500 being worse than Intel's old Core 2 Duos. Now don't get me wrong, I loved the Core 2 Duo back in the day, but I hope that sort of helps with context in regard to how this chip stacks up performance-wise. I don't want to give up on this though. I think it's fair to say that Linux does improve the £5 or $7 laptop experience, even with the 4GB of RAM and HDD configuration. I do have a spare 4GB DDR3 module and SSD though, so let's see if these will help. Now luckily both the RAM and storage compartments are easy to access with the HP 255. We just have to remove the battery to get to the screws and we're halfway there. Luckily we also have a spare RAM slot. There was only one 4GB stick in here already. Now I don't think this will help much, neither will the SSD, but considering these sort of upgrades shouldn't really cost too much money, I think they're worth talking about and trying. I could have done this at the start, but I wanted to see if the laptop was usable as is without spending any money. Now the SSD meant we needed to reinstall Linux Mint, but this was definitely a quicker process second time around. Just like before, all necessary drivers were installed during setup. This certainly feels a little more responsive now. Opening Steam and installing Skyrim, for example, was a far smoother process, even if it still refused to run at more than 1 FPS or actually load into the game. Like I said, we are still very much CPU bound, and it's a shame we can't upgrade that. When it comes to Left 4 Dead 2, this actually ran a little better if I'm honest. The average frame rate still sucked, but the game itself seemed more consistent overall, and in some areas even hit 30 frames per second every so often. Honestly, the main improvements do come from the snappier feel of the operating system, and this also gave me the patience to stick with it a little longer and finally test Minecraft too. This was also at the lowest possible resolution, about 480p, with the lowest settings of course, and although we did start off quite slowly, the performance picked up after about a minute or so. For the price, and I have to keep bringing it back to that, I really can't complain too much. Yet if we're talking pure CPU power, there are far better options out there, even for a £5, if you're happy to buy used. Of course there isn't much you can do with just a processor and nothing else, but part of me feels that staring at a desktop CPU on a shelf would be more enjoyable than using this laptop for extended periods of time. Now seriously, if you have something like this, consider a RAM and SSD upgrade, as well as a potential Linux install instead of Windows, because it could really help you out. That's it for this one then. I don't want to use this machine any longer than I have to, even though we certainly did improve it, I think, with the Linux installation and the upgrades to the RAM and storage. But let me know what you think. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.